Welcome back to the Kentucky Hot Wheels video series. Please excuse the mess, we just began to put away Christmas decorations. The day after Christmas, the outside temperature had dropped down to -11 degrees Fahrenheit overnight. That morning, I went out to the garage to give our 1968 VW Beetle a start just to make sure the battery hadn't been zapped by the cold air. As I do every time I give her a weekly start during the winter, I always peek under the hood too, just to make sure everything is working as it should. It's a good thing that I took a peek this time because fuel was pouring out around the fuel pump. As you can see in this video that I recorded a couple of days later, it's leaking quite a bit and will have to be replaced. I'm not exactly sure how old this fuel pump is or if the extreme cold weather had anything to do with it failing, but I'll be replacing it with this Delphi mechanical fuel pump. I've had great luck with Delphi in the past, so I'm not hesitant purchasing this as a replacement. These aren't cheap Chinese knockoffs, they're actually a good quality and made in Korea. There are a couple of things to consider when purchasing a fuel pump. Basically, there are two styles of fuel pumps and pushrods for the fuel pumps. One pushrod is a 100mm short style and one is a 107.5mm long style. The 100mm short style that is pictured on the right is typically used if you have an alternator installed. The 107.5mm long style that is pictured on the left is typically used if you have a generator installed. This is what the pushrod looks like. The 100mm and the 107.5mm pushrods look exactly the same, one is just a little longer than the other. If you remove the pushrod to replace gaskets, take note of its orientation in the flange block spacer. It has to go back in exactly in the same orientation as you removed it. Also, the flange block spacer can sometimes be a pain to remove. Be cautious about prying on it to remove it. They break fairly easy, and the last thing you want to have to do is dig the broken parts out of your casing. Again, only remove it if you're replacing the gaskets and lift straight up on it. I'll start by removing the old fuel pump. Typically, you only need a few tools to do this. I'll have a 13mm wrench, a 13mm socket, a small pair of vice grips, a flathead screwdriver and a Phillips head screwdriver on hand to swap out the fuel pump. First, I'll loosen the fuel line hose clamps. I'll use the small pair of vice grips to restrict the input fuel line. This is also a good time to inspect the fuel line for cracks or any deterioration. If you have ethanol in your fuel, it can wreak havoc on the rubber fuel lines. These fuel lines were just replaced a couple of years ago, so they're still in very good condition. Next, I'll use the 13mm socket to remove the nuts that secure the fuel pump. Be careful not to lose the washers. With the nuts and washers removed, the fuel pump should lift off easily. It's hard to tell just by looking, but my guess is that the diaphragm inside of the pump has failed. There is another way to check this as well, and I'll show you in just a moment. At first, I thought the inlet tube had failed, but after further inspection, I'm confident that the diaphragm is the issue. Now I'll remove the pushrod to give it a quick inspection. As I mentioned earlier, keep in mind the orientation of the pushrod. It has to go back exactly the same way as it came out. I'll remove the gasket that sits between the fuel pump and flange spacer. There's really no need at this time to remove the flange spacer, but if it'll lift out easily, I'll go ahead and replace the gasket between the spacer and the casing. As you can see, it didn't want to cooperate, so for now, I'll just leave it. As I mentioned earlier, another way to determine if your diaphragm has failed is that it will allow fuel to drain into the case. If you check your oil level and notice that there's more there than there should be, it's a good chance that fuel has leaked past the diaphragm and into the case. As you can see, my oil level is way higher than it should be. This really sucks because I just changed the oil about 2 months ago. With the mixture of gas now in the case, I'll have to drain it again. I'll do another oil change next time we have some good weather. This could have been a lot worse, especially if the fuel pump had failed while out on the road with a hot engine. I'm still waiting for the new fuel pump to be delivered. While I wait, I'll double check the specs of the pushrod to make sure it's good to go. I'll also install a new gasket and prepare the pushrod as I wait for the new fuel pump. I'll apply a little sticky grease to both ends of the pushrod to ensure proper lubrication and free movement. Again, double check the orientation of the pushrod before you install it in the flange. The new fuel pump has finally arrived. I'll give it a quick inspection to make sure it wasn't damaged during shipping. Even though this is a brand new fuel pump, I also need to make sure that all of the screws are tightened properly. And finally, it's time to install the new fuel pump. Make sure that it is seated properly before tightening any of the nuts. There should be a little resistance with the new fuel pump pressing against the pushrod. Also, give your fuel lines one last inspection to ensure they're not cracked or deteriorated. I'll remove the distributor cap to give me a little more access to the back stud and nut. Make sure the clamps are tight and secure. The only thing left to do is to give it a try and see how it works. As you can see, it works perfectly. I'll continue doing my weekly cold starts throughout the winter months, and I'll keep an eye on the fuel pump to make sure it's good to go. It looks as if we'll have good weather next weekend as well, so I'll probably go ahead and do the oil change then. I appreciate you watching our videos, and I really hope that you found some useful information. If so, please take a moment to give the video a thumbs up and leave us a comment. We also hope that you'll consider subscribing to our channel. We do a lot of neat things. Thanks again, and until next time, take care.